Most of us will probably have Scandinavian DNA, a remnant of our ancestors, the Vikings, who settled in these parts in the 9th century. The Danes and the Norwegians considered the Humber estuary a good place for supplies, water and trade. Folklore, of course, tells us Grimsby is named after Grim, a Danish fisherman who rescued the infant Havelock from a drifting boat. The baby was a Danish prince, and he was returned to his home and later married the English princess Goldborough, while Grim received treasure and built this town, which he named after himself. The story has been retold over the years, from Geoffrey Gaymar's Estuary des Anglais to the Lay of Havelock, a 19th century translation. It even features in the town's seal. But what proof was there that Grim was a real person? Did he exist? With massive migration into the area over the centuries, the question has to be asked why.
I think that one reason a lot of people from Scandinavia settled in this area was because the North Sea was a great highway. It was a means of communication, it was a means of moving around. And of course, in earlier times, as people moved from the continent to Britain, to the British Isles, it was an obvious place to come to.
So with the Humber estuary being an obvious place for the Scandinavians to come, it was inevitable that settlements would be formed and trade exist.
One of the things about moving between Britain and the continent and the trade, particularly the trade with Scandinavia, was the fact that why do we trade? We trade because other people have things that we want and we have things that they want. And what particularly interested us at many times in terms of the trade from Scandinavia was in the medieval period we wanted fish. I know we've got a lot of fish in the North Sea and I know we made a lot of them, but we particularly wanted things like what was called stockfish. And this was dried cod, dried in the northern regions of Norway in the medieval period. And it would keep once dry for a long period of time. And this was really useful in Britain because it was a form of protein that you could eat in the winter. So we traded from the Humber estuary, from a place like Grimsby, with the north of Norway where this stockfish was produced. In later times, we wanted timber. In fact, even from the very earliest days, we wanted timber as well. And of course, Scandinavia was a place that had large reserves of timber. And we, over many centuries, took large amounts of timber, as indeed we still do from either Scandinavia or from the Baltic.
Long before refrigeration, Norwegian ice was also being imported through the ports of Grimsby and Hull, along with Swedish iron and steel as Britain became industrialised. The heart of both ports is founded on these strong trade links with Northern Europe.
Well, apart from timber and fish, which were early imports into Grimsby, all sorts of what we would say is unusual things today were imported. We took a lot of hawks in through Grimsby. You might think, hawks? What would you want with hawks? Well, remember, in Britain, sort of hunting, falconry was a big thing. And that's where the sort of well-to-do who went hunting got their hawks from. So that was important. We also imported quite large quantities of what we called tren oil. That was fish oil that was used for lighting people's houses. I think it was a bit smellier than our modern day electric lights, but it was, the sort of thing that people would have put up with in those days.
As we travel into the Lincolnshire and East Yorkshire countryside, we only have to look at a map or road signs to see the area was dominated by the Danes. The suffixes by and thorpe for a homestead to toft, beck and home certainly show Danish influence. But it's our everyday language which shows the strongest connections to our Viking forebears.
Some of the Lincolnshire words are direct copies of the Scandinavian language, particularly the Danish, and I think that is as a result of the Danes actually settling in Lincolnshire. I believe a lot of the Danes, though we have this tale of them coming in to fight, in actual fact many of them were farmers, and so they would come to settle amongst the English farmers, and they would have things in common. And of course the families eventually would want to communicate with one another, And to communicate, you need a common language. And so I think that the people that had lived there in Lincolnshire prior to the Danes would actually take some of those words, probably the other way as well, but took some of those words and incorporated them into their own language, some of which actually remain, they do in the standard English, but you will find in the farming dialect of Lincolnshire that the Lincolnshire dialect actually contains quite a lot of Danish words. You can actually look back at them and think that is almost a direct copy. So, I mean, I'll give you one example that amused me. A friend of mine, a school teacher, he came up from Bristol and he came up as a PE teacher. And on one occasion, he recounted to me that he found the lads stood without the ball. And he said, well, come on then, let's get on. I said, we've lost the ball. Well, where is it? And he said, it's over the beck. And the teacher said, I beg your pardon, it's over the beck. And he said, I honestly had no idea what they meant. And he said, certainly down in Somerset, he said, I'm sure we don't have that word. And the beck, of course, he learned subsequently, was the stream at the bottom.
Though some of our words and phrases have been lost through the years, in rural parts they can still be heard, and in a way the area's isolation has helped.
The Danes definitely influenced the English language many, many years ago, and I think because Lincolnshire was so rural and people didn't travel about, didn't mix with others, they actually kept a lot of these words that had been used in standard English of their day, but gradually have been lost in what we call Queen's English today, but in actual fact they remained in the Lincolnshire dialect that was spoken in the village when I grew up. And I think we can see lots of Danish connections with those words.
Weather expressions feature prominently in the phrases handed to us, in particular relating to rain and mud.
One of them that springs to mind is siling. When you say it's siling with rain, that means you've got an awful lot. It's pouring with rain. And apparently, the Danes and the Swedes, when they have it pouring with rain nowadays, say a word very similar to siling. But certainly we had squad and blather on the farm. Squad and blather, you don't get that in town, so maybe the Danes didn't live in town, or maybe there wasn't so much muck. Muck. That's Scandinavian as well. That's not perhaps terribly polite now, but it was what you got when you were living in the villages in rural Lincolnshire. We had muck, we had squad, we had blather. Blather? Blatra or blitra. Wish I could pronounce this Danish better, but it meant wet, soft muck. And that got up your trouser legs. Squad, blather, blatra. I can't remember, squirder or something like that. Swerder. Both of them meant muddy, sticky. I think it sounds as though there could have been connections there as well. Because if the Danes were farmers, they were going to have squad and blather as well.